Yesterday, Chris Cotton introduced us to Preston Taylor and did a little history of the 19th century Churches of Christ, disciples in Nashville. And then Mac Ice introduced us to A.M. Burton and G.P. Bowser and Institute. And then Brother Angus, J.B. Angus, responded to both presentations. Today, Jeremy Sweet will talk about the Nashville Christian Institute. And then Robert Jackson will be responding to what Jeremy has to say. And then we'll have about 20 minutes for dialogue. 20 minutes. And for the dialogue, let's keep it to 30-second sort of question or comment. This is not a moment for a 5-minute comment. Okay. If you want to have a further discussion, then these gentlemen will be up here. They can talk about it further. But it's more about engaging the dialogue they're having and asking questions about the history or the future in terms of what these gentlemen have to say. All of whom they all have studied at Lipscomb University. They've all studied in the theology department, the graduate theology department. 4 of them have graduated. I won't tell you which one. No, you gave it away, Jim. Okay. Gave it away, Angus. So, but we're honored to have them here, and their presentations yesterday were excellent, and we're looking forward to more today. So today, Jeremy Sweet, and then Robert Jackson.
Good afternoon. It's good to see everyone here. We have a good crowd. I think this is more than can fit into Avalon last year, so it's good to see everybody. I'll just begin by saying that this has been a fun research project in terms of the people I've been able to meet and the files that I've been able to look at. Just to mention a couple, I appreciate, first of all, Lipscomb's special collections. They were very helpful and let me look at the NCI files and the Keeble and Burton files. I was able to meet with Willie Cato's daughter, who had several of his files, and that was amazing to look at. David Jones was very gracious and kind and spent a couple hours with me and gave me a personal tour of 24th and Batavia and the area around there. Very, very kind and generous. I was able to look at some of Miss Lambert Campbell's files as well, and so it's been great fun for me. I've learned a lot, and I've been able to look at some things that I've really enjoyed looking at. Let me start with a statement from the 4142 catalog. And actually, before I do that, I noticed that Mac asked yesterday how many people had heard of Southern Practical Institute. I'm just going to do that real quick for Nashville Christian Institute as well. How many people have heard of this school? Okay, so quite a bit more, at least half. Okay, if you haven't, that's all right. We'll be talking about that. It is an educational institution for African Americans. And let me look at the opening page of the 4142 catalog. It said, "We hope every student who attends this school will embrace the philosophy of life which acknowledges our responsibility to God and to our fellow man. A great gift has been made to every one of us, the privilege of living in the world for a short span of years, and the opportunity of doing our part to help the less fortunate, to improve civilization, to advance knowledge, both the scientific knowledge of men and the wisdom which is from above." And it lists a couple of mottos there: lifting as we climb, and also labor conquers all things. Labor conquers all things. I want to notice a couple of influences that we see with the Nashville Christian Institute. So first of all, Booker T. Washington had a school. He was founder of the Tuskegee Institute. And he emphasized an academic training of the head and also a vocational training of the hand. And so he was successful in his endeavors. You can see he was toward the end of the 19th century into the 20th century. And he's well known, wrote the book Up From Slavery, and that's been a book that many in Churches of Christ have been looking at and reading for a similar type of endeavor. Another influence in this piece is David Lipscomb. So David Lipscomb is the founder of Nashville Bible School, and he had as the foundation or the basis of his school the Bible. It was daily instruction in Bible, and so everything else flowed out of that biblical instruction. Well, if you were able to hear the talks yesterday of Silver Point and Southern Practical, there had been a long efforts that had been made in creating a school for African Americans, African American children. And so it was patterned in part after Booker T. Washington's school and his model, but also after Lipscomb. And they actually consulted, several brothers consulted with Lipscomb about that. So the head, the hand, and the heart. And that would have been a statement they used to talk about the school. The school was to be the head and the hand, as I mentioned, the academic and vocational, but also the heart, the spiritual training. And so that was the goal for the school that was established here. This is Nashville Christian Institute, as most people would remember and see it. There are two main buildings there. The schoolhouse, and again, this has been on 24th and Batavia. The schoolhouse, and then in the 50s, there was also an auditorium that was built, and that would also had a dorm room for the boarding students that were there. This school existed from 1939. The dates are fuzzy and changing, 39, 40, 41, and we'll see some reason for those shifting dates in a second, until 1967. Statistics are a little bit hard to come by to know exactly, the amount of students that we're talking about. But by 1955, Choate says that there were 234 graduates, with 97 of those preachers. So again, you see that emphasis upon spiritual training there. Edward Robinson states that there were 3,000 total graduates for the school, and I'm guessing there's probably twice as many students. So 3,000, 6,000, there were several thousand students that were at this school. Daily instruction in Bible, and I love this picture. You've probably heard of Marshall Keeble. He was the main face of the school, and you see him here with boys surrounding him as he has the Bible out. The Bible was a main piece of instruction there for the school, and there's several ways that this instruction was carried out. For example, in 1944, they had an 8-week training program for preachers, African-American preachers that were able to come in. It was also around that same time that the annual lectureship started. So this was a place and an opportunity where they were able to provide training and education here. And with an emphasis really for the church. This was an education for the church and an effort to strengthen the church. And so we see this daily instruction in the Bible. There's a lot of pictures here. There's a lot of fascinating pictures you can see inside the school. These are some taken of the classes. There's a catalog of 41 and 42, and you'll see a lot of adult students that are there at that time. So the school started with kind of a meager set of circumstances with really 2 students and a night school. And so the reason I mentioned it's hard to tell about that starting date is because they got the school ready, but once they had the school ready, they had to get students. And so that was part of the process. And a lot of adult learners would have also joined in with this. But as I mentioned, they would have had academic training along with their Bible instruction, vocational training, and also some extracurriculars, home ec, music, voice, and glee club. So those are some wonderful pictures you can see inside the school there. Okay, the school was an initiative of the African American community. So in 1920, you remember from yesterday that the Southern Practical Institute was a school that lasted just a month or 2. And so it was pretty short in the time that it was open. In that same year, some members from the Jefferson Street Church of Christ came together, and they wanted to buy some property or some land to continue the educational efforts in Nashville. So they bought some land and property on Albion Street. They planned to open the school 3 years later. Those plans didn't come to fruition. In fact, we see it's going to take a little while longer for that to happen. In 1928, they pay the final note on the final bill and the note for the school. And so the school is paid off, and they have a statement in the Advocate that says, we're going to be opening school in the fall. Let's have a planning meeting at the Jefferson Street Church and talk about this. Whites and blacks are both invited to consider this effort. And so they're going to open in the fall. Well, that was bad timing if you know your history. The very next year was the stock market crash and the depression, and so it was a hard time that was there. And so it'd actually be another decade before the school kind of gets underway. And so at that time, Nashville became interested in that property. And so they worked out an arrangement with the owners, trustees, that they would sell the property they had for Nashville to build a school. And in exchange, they were given $15,000 and then also another property. And so you can see this property here. This is from that 41-42 catalog. So you can see it's pretty run down. They were given the Ashcroft School. And so this was a dilapidated school that the city was getting rid of. And so the brethren there took that school. Mrs. Lambert Campbell again describes this meager start. She said it had started in 1939 with 2-day students and a small adult night school that met in an old condemned school building with outside plumbing and a water spigot in the yard. Okay, just to further state the fact that this was an initiative of the African American community. In that 41-42 catalog, you see that the board, the trustees, and the executive board were all African Americans. So they were together making the decisions and the choices for that school. That's important because remember, you're starting in 39 or 40, and it's just a couple years later that you're going to have a major change within the school. So let's look at that major change. A.M. Burton. You've probably heard of A.M. Burton, seen his name as you walked around campus. He was very wealthy. If you heard Max talk yesterday, you see how he came about those funds, how he used those funds, and he donated a lot of his funds to projects associated with Churches of Christ. So he gave in 1943 a $50,000 donation, although the way Angus worded it yesterday was probably better yesterday, that wasn't so much a donation as it was a buying, it was a purchase. And so he gives this donation. He provides financial support for Marshall Keeble, and he had been doing that actually for several different years as Marshall Keeble went about the country preaching. And he provided continued support. But the support came with strings, and the strings were the control of the school. And so when Burton gave the money, and remember the history, a financially strapped school, struggling, money was part of the issue as far as getting this going and getting this working. And so A.M. Burton gives $50,000 here. But what he does is he changes the board to a majority of white members as opposed to an all-black board. And so just as he had done at Silver Point, as Mac mentioned yesterday, he does that here with Nashville Christian Institute. I don't know if you can see the one on the left. That's a map, and you see all these strings or arrows kind of coming into that central point. So with A.M. Burton and the support that came there were a lot of fundraising efforts that went out. And the Gospel Advocate, they went out all over the place. And so help the educational efforts here. And so all of these came in. Sounds like we're getting some extra music. All these fundraising efforts came in. This is one over here on the right, and I actually put the picture on top because it has a little more detail. I actually had a scan of the picture. But it said something like this: let's change this, old, dilapidated. That would have been pictures of the property before they had worked on them. Let's change that into something like this. And so there were efforts throughout to bring money in, and this would have primarily went out to white congregations, Gospel Advocate, and also black congregations as well. 5 minutes. All right. Marshall Keeble and his boys, he went out preaching. That was part of the fundraising efforts that were there. A lot we could say about that, but let's move on to the closing of the school. The school closed on January 2nd, 1967, so it's 50 years. This month marks 50 years since the closing of that school. When the school was closed, there was a scholarship fund that was created, the Burton-Keeble Scholarship Fund. And so the assets from the school was sold, the assets went into that scholarship fund. But what we're going to see is that there were two perspectives on what happened with that money and why. And really what results is two fellowships. Wes Crawford's book entitled Shattering the Illusion, in that book he argued that there was an illusion of racial harmony kept on basically through this school. So as whites supported the school, there was this feeling of we're doing our duty. There's united front. There's no racial problems here. But the closing of the school revealed that that really was an illusion. There was not a unity that was there. And so we can notice a few things about that. White Christians felt an ease of conscience because of their financial support. But you have to understand exactly how that came about. And so there wasn't a partnership where you help a brother or an equal, but often the help came in the form of paternalism. And so the African American race were treated more like children that needed our help, so to speak, rather than a partner. And so you can see that when it comes to the change of the board, right? The whites would control and make the decisions. You can see that in other efforts as well, as there was really a distance there between the races. That was true because David Lipscomb College, for example, didn't integrate until 13 years after the Brown versus Board of Education ruling. So they delayed. They weren't alone in Southern schools in that, but they certainly delayed in those efforts. So how did whites respond to this? Well, they responded with, they felt they had done their duty. They had helped, and if they took notice, they just went about their business. Some denied that racism existed. After all, look at all the help that had happened. Keeble had preached in many white churches, many converts. Others simply felt like this was not an issue that the church needed to deal with. That was a social issue, and the church deals with spiritual issues. So how did blacks respond to African Americans? Well, first of all, there was a lawsuit, and this has become more common knowledge, especially with a program that was held in the auditorium not too long ago. A lawsuit that basically was issued by O.B. Ellie and some other African American members there against the board, the white board. That case was ultimately dismissed, but the statement was basically, it really came down to a matter of control. They had lost control. Remember, this was started and initiated by African Americans. And I want to have a quote also that maybe explains some of the lawsuit a little bit better. And this is from R.N. Hogan, as Mac mentioned yesterday. And I'll quote him in an article, "The Grab of the Century." The school was a grab of the century. In order to secure grants from the government, they are allowing a few Negroes to attend David Lipscomb College. This is, of course, in exchange for robbing the Negroes of their school, and also in order to secure grants from the government. These men who claim to be Christians are guilty of robbing poor Negroes who struggled and gave their meager income in order to build a Christian school for their children who were denied the privilege of attending the white so-called Christian school. So on one side, you have apathy or a feeling of we've done our duty. On the other side, there had been building resentment. And so as the thesis goes for Wes Crawford, it really was an illusion of racial unity. That was not there. And so you have two fellowships. Different fellowships are not new. That's happened with the pre-mill group, with One Cup, with institutional, non-institutional issues. But this time it happened based on race. I'd love to talk about these characters more. I got 1 minute. They asked G.P. Bowser to come in 1939 for the school, and he said he wouldn't do it. He wouldn't come to Nashville. Bowser was an academic, Keeble was a promoter, and the school basically chose Keeble. So he said, I won't go to Nashville. Remember, Nashville is the center of the establishment, the school, the paper, money with members. All of that was, the epicenter was found in Nashville. And he said he wouldn't go there. This comes full circle when you realize that the Keeble Burton Scholarship was really not supported in large part by the African American community. A lot of that support went to a Bowser Scholarship at Southwestern Christian. So it's interesting to see the start and the end of the school there, and those two figures. A lot more could be said about that. My conclusion in 3 statements. This is a story that needs to be told. We need to hear this. You know, half the people here hadn't even heard of Nashville Christian Institute. Also, I would suggest that we need introspection as we think about this story, and really it should move us into action as we think about what can we do as we consider this story. We need to avoid also 2 really superficial readings of history or dealings with history. One of those would be to kind of whitewash everything. We were great. Everything was good. Look at all the good that was done. There's some good that was done, but we need to have our eyes open. But we also don't need to demonize. You know, they were all just a bunch of racists. I can't believe all they did. This was in the air that they breathed. This was what they dealt with. So our question is, what are we going to do today? Maybe Robert's going to answer some of that for us. Too much there, but I do thank you for your attention.